By request, today we're doing a pen and ink study by Master Shirahama from her manga series called Witch Hat Atelier using this image. There's 4 steps to this process, and I'll walk you through each so that you can use the same methods to study your favorite masterworks. You'll need tracing paper, fine liner pens, felt pen, HB lead pencil, sketching paper or sketchbook, and your favorite eraser. The best way to observe is to trace the image, so that we're literally retracing the decisions made by the master. This forces us to take our time and makes the learning more concrete than simply glancing at it. For example, while tracing, I realized that the character is standing on elevated terrain, which I had missed at first glance of the image. For an effective study of the drawing, while I trace, I pay particular attention to these 8 questions. From what direction are the sources of light? Where are the darks, reflections, cast shadows, highlights, midtones? What strokes were used for building values? Hatches, cross hatches, what kind of textures? Which sections are shaded with marks versus solid blacks? Are there changes in the angle of line direction? Where's the horizon line? From what perspective is the viewer looking at the subject? How is the main subject framed in the composition? Our next step is to imitate 2 to 3 areas of the drawing as practice. While tracing, were there any areas of the drawing that you found more challenging or entirely different than how you would normally approach line work? There were for me. The drapery folds in the robe I found quite perplexing. So what a perfect opportunity to practice. First, using my 05 pen, I recreate the line pattern that the master used in isolation without a surrounding shape. Next, I sketch a rough robe shape, then repeat the drapery line pattern within the shape. I'll admit that drawing cloth is something that I typically avoid because it's tricky. Proof that doing a master study is useful. This is really pushing me to practice. Once more, repeat the lines, but this time with my marker, aiming for natural looking volume in the folds. Then I sketched that faraway mountain range in the background. You'll notice in the reference that the master executed the shading in a way that suggests more peaks. Not all the shapes have an outline, so I'm aiming to imitate that effect by penciling in blocks of shadow where the hatch marks will go. Next are these bushes. They have stronger shadow in the image with some solid blacks. This gives the illusion that they're below elevated terrain. Also because the lighting in that area is behaving differently from the light in the overall landscape. Now that I've rehearsed the challenging elements, each individually, I know what to expect when assembling the image as a whole, and my marks will be more deliberate in this next step. I'm going ahead and redrawing the image in my good sketchbook with an HB pencil, starting with a few marks to position the location of the character. I take a sighting of the proportions in relation to the head. Using my pencil and fingers, looks like about 7 heads tall. Using loose shapes to construct some anatomy, then on top of the anatomy, establish outlines of the robe. It takes me a few tries to capture the flow action of the robe. I correct it by comparing the size and shape of the folds against the negative space and the position of the legs in the reference. Having drawn the anatomy underneath helps for understanding how the robe would drape with the wind over the character's form. Then I refine the character's face, not missing that he wears glasses. The hair, hands, a bit of detailing for the books and scrolls. On second thought, I'm simplifying and include only one of the books. I include a few of the ornaments in the costume while continuing to strip down non-essential details to keep my practice session under an hour. Now the landscape elements. Starting with the horizon line and capturing the areas where there's more features in the terrain that cast stronger shadows. A few marks for the mountain range and directional lines for where additional vegetation will go. Finishing with an outline for the cast shadow beneath the character. Using the kneaded eraser to remove construction lines and excess graphite, now it's ready for the ink application. I'll start with a 01 for the facial features. The hair, and hands to ensure I capture the shapes accurately. Then I switch to an 03 to draw the remainder of the character, and I'll later switch to my 05 or the marker to fill in the blacks. As a general rule, I use thicker lines for the elements that are the closest to the viewer and thinner lines for the far away elements. You'll note that I'm going over some of the thinner lines now to create more depth. I'm not 100% certain of this, but I believe that Master Shirahama uses dip pens to ink her manga. If someone knows, please tell us in the comments. I prefer to use fine liner pens for studies because it's quicker than dip pens, and essentially I'm using this as a warm-up. This warm-up exercise is super beneficial as well. The learnings will be fresh and can directly be applied in my own work immediately after this. While imitating the strokes of the master, it serves to build muscle memory for mark making. I call these sessions putting in the mileage or stacking the hay in the barn. At this stage of the drawing, I'm not simply copying, I'm adapting what I learned from the decisions of the master into my own technique. For example, how the subject is framed with lighter values, and where the master used cross-hatching to treat the shadows in the foreground of the picture plane. The last step is to assess. I quickly compare my sketch to the work of the master to see if I succeeded in applying similar principles that she used in creating the artwork. Ideally, I addressed all of the areas that we indicated in the initial stages of this process. Having a structured method of study works well for my learning preferences, though I hope that in demonstrating this 4-step process, you've been inspired with more ideas on how to conduct your own master studies. I'm happy to read your suggestions of masters whom you think would be a good fit to draw on this channel in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.